göra i samband med det.
As individuals and jointly in our societies. We do this in the spirit of Alfred Nobel, to the greatest benefit of humankind. Dialogue is a key word in this context. We want all of you who are here, but also all of you who follow us digitally, to participate in our conversation. Water matters is the heading of today's conference. It is truth. Water is life's matter and matrix, mother and medium. There is no life without water, said a former Nobel laureate. As for myself, after last summer draft here in Sweden, and not least in the archipelago where I spent my time, Benjamin Franklin's clear aphorism, "When the well is dry, we know the worth of water," goes a very long way. Indeed, a great sense of urgency should characterize the meeting on climate change that is going on in Poland right now. Today we will examine water from many perspectives. We will look at the importance to the human body, but also to our ability to live and to survive. And we will explore the role of the sea, not least for climate change. And we will also travel to the bottom of the sea. And we will not be content with our own planet. We will in fact travel to Mars. Water also awakens feelings. In a drop of water are found all the secrets of all the oceans, said a Lebanese poet. We will today encounter the role of water in a performance lecture. And finally, we will discuss solutions. In the end, this is about politics, serious politics. Today, as we cover a wide range of topics, from science to politics to art, we are acting entirely in the spirit of Alfred Nobel. He was very much a Renaissance person. He believed in the value of facts and knowledge, and he wanted to work for peace. In times like this, it is more important than ever to highlight what the Nobel Prize stands for. And it is in this spirit that we organize exhibitions and discussions, produce digital material, and organize conferences like this. We've done this more and more in recent years. And next year we will be in Santiago in January, and we will be in Japan in March, in Madrid in May, and in Berlin in the fall, and we might also go to India. There is a huge and gratifying interest for what we are doing, especially among young people. It's also in this spirit that we will try to create a Nobel Center in Stockholm, despite the reversals of last year. A place where knowledge will encounter culture and politics just like today, but all the year round. This idea is simply too good to give up. Let me once again thank you all for coming here to this day about water, featuring discussions and dialogue. Our special thanks to KaibiganNet AB, the City of Gothenburg, the Västra Götaland region, and Ericsson, who have helped us with Nobel Week dialogue over all these years. A frog does not drink up the pond in which it lives, they say. Will man live up to that? Let me finish with that hope. Thank you.
Well, hello. It's a very great pleasure to be back here as your guide to today's meeting once again, and it's an enormous pleasure to see this wonderful full house. Having got you all in here, the first thing I need to do is to tell you how to get out again, just in case something happens. So if you could all just please take a note of each, off into space, back into our bodies, and down towards a molecular level. And I think it's true to say that at the end of this day, all of us are going to look at this in a slightly different way. Now, to get us started, I'm delighted to welcome Johan Rockström to give us an introductory talk on the future of humanity on Earth. Thank you.
Your Royal Highness, dear colleagues, friends, we all share the nervousness of living in a turbulent time. Everything from what will certainly be remembered as a year when the Earth system for the first time sends invoices back across the whole planet, starting with the deaths in Japan with heat waves and flood, over 200 deaths, all the way to the unprecedented forest fires in California, the floods in Kerala, the heat waves in Europe, something that occurs at 1 degree Celsius warming. Connect that with the geopolitical turbulence of the uprisings in France, Brexit, Bolsonaro, the uncertainty in Australia. We live certainly in a world where we're not really yet at a point where we're truly seeing a transformation towards a prosperous, socially inclusive pathway for humanity on Earth. It's therefore at a Nobel Week, when positioning water as the bloodstream in the biosphere, as the core of the future for humanity, it's important for me to start by sharing what I would argue are the three most important scientific messages from science to humanity over the last 10 years. Number one, we've entered a new geological epoch. We're in the Anthropocene, anthros for humans. We're now the largest driver of change at the planetary scale. We're hitting the ceiling of biophysical hardwired processes that regulates the state of the planet. Second, we know with very high degree of certainty that the Holocene, the interglacial phase we've been in since the last ice age that we left 12,000 years ago, is such a remarkably stable state of the planet. It's an equilibrium within which we have been able to thrive and develop modern civilizations as we know it. It's our Garden of Eden that has stayed within plus minus 1 degree Celsius. The third insight is that we built up our societies believing that things change incrementally, linearly, and thereby predictably. But the reality is completely reversed. Resilience means that systems, from rainforests to wetlands to financial systems, can cope with disturbance during a long period of time until they break, cross tipping points, and can abruptly shift and no longer support humanity. Put these three insights together and it leads to the insight that we need planetary boundaries. We need scientific targets that gives us in green a safe operating space within which we can have prosperity, social inclusion within a stable Earth system. This, dear friends and colleagues, is what I would argue is the new definition of sustainable development in the Anthropocene. That we now need to become planetary stewards of the whole system where water fundamentally is part of the core. Now, the reason for nervousness when we meet in Stockholm these days is because what's happened just in the past few weeks. The World Energy Outlook showed us with some shocking information that global emissions are on the rise with 1.7% in 2017. We're back on unfortunate rise of increase. Yesterday, you had the brutal news published in The Guardian when the Global Carbon Project showed that 2018 is actually projected to be a 2.7% rise in emissions, even faster than over the past 15 years. This is occurring at a situation where we just, when we met in Paris, actually had some good news. We were starting to bend the curve of emissions. 2014, 2015, 2016, we're leveling off because we saw that now we seem to be reacting and acting on climate change. But unfortunately, we're back on this high level of emissions. Now the drama, which has water as its core, is the following. During these years when we leveled off, the World Meteorological Organization just a few days back, released a report on concentration of greenhouse gases, showing, as you see here, that the concentration of greenhouse gases is continuing to rise. But not only that, look at the numbers. 2015, when we met in Paris, we bumped through the 400 ppm mark, a place we haven't been for the past millions of years. Then it jumps up with 3 ppm in 2016, and another 2.2 ppm 2017. This is faster than even when we were increasing our emissions. And this occurs during years when we did not, as humans, contribute to rise in emissions. What is happening? Why is global warming intensifying even more, despite the fact that we seem to be increasingly doing the right thing? Well, we have the answer. And the answer is the biosphere. The answer is the hydrological cycle, the land system, biodiversity is no longer keeping its resilience intact in the way that we have seen it done before. What you see here is emissions to the left for fossil fuel burning, and the columns that go negative is the carbon sinks of carbon taken up in natural ecosystems on land and in oceans. 25% in oceans and 25% on land, half of our emission of greenhouse gases are taken up by natural ecosystems, providing this world's largest subsidy to the world economy through its resilience. Now, 2015, 2016, we start to see the cracks in this system for the first time. Now, we do not know exactly why. It may be very much connected to the fact that these were El Niño years, where we have droughts and forest fires, which means that biomass grows more slowly. But we cannot exclude, or I would even argue it's very likely, that it's also connected to the fact that we are deforesting, degrading land, ruining ecosystems in a too fast pace where ecosystems have difficulty in keeping pace with our pressures. That is why water is so important. Temperatures continue rising. We just learned that 2018 will be the 4th warmest year on record. The 3 other ones is 17, 16, 15. So this is a bad trend. We also have research coming out. This research on the slide here is not even published yet, showing that water and land are fundamental to the future to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. Here you see the most recent analysis showing that if we continue as we do today, and if we would really try to stay within the planetary boundaries, we would have to reduce food production with 50% on Earth to come back into the safe operating space on water, land, biodiversity and nutrients. But the same analysis showed that we have potential through the technologies we have today to increase food production with 100% through sustainable intensification, which means that we actually can achieve the Sustainable Development Goals through a transformation of the global food system, moving away from unsustainable plow-based systems and intensive mechanized agriculture to more crop rotations, more biodiversity-based ecosystem approaches that works more closely with nature through, for example, conservation intelligent water harvesting systems. It is possible. This study was just published by Marcus Brinkman and colleagues for the first time, checking what will it take for us to stay within planetary boundaries in the food system. On the y-axis here you have the different boundaries from greenhouse gases to blue water is the middle one, which is mostly green, nitrogen, phosphorus. And what we're looking for is to be in the green space, meaning when the food system actually operates within the safe operating space of planetary boundaries. Don't go through all the details in this slide, it's just the key message is that the only food system that takes us to a safe space on Earth is if we transition into water efficient, really sustainably intensified, flexitarian diets where we reduce food waste with a factor 4. This is truly not only a food system revolution, it's a behavioral change revolution for us in terms of changing diets. 4 billion people on Earth live under conditions of water scarcity, over half of the world population today. We know scientifically today also that geopolitically water is really sensitive. What you see on this map is science indicating in red the regions that depend to 80% or more for their rainfall on upwind evaporation. What this means is the following. Look at China here, which is in red. they depend to more than 80% of the rainfall evaporating from the forests in Russia and eastern parts of Europe, meaning that the way the countries upwind manage their ecosystems depend on the downwind availability of fresh water and therefore stability in societies. We have recently shown that this has even larger implications through the hothouse Earth analysis, indicating that if we push global warming too far, if we erode the biosphere too far, we risk crossing tipping points that can lead to domino effects where even 2 degrees Celsius warming could bump us up to another 1/2 degree to 2.5 degrees if we cross tipping points that can start processes of tipping according to the hothouse Earth analysis, showing that 2 degrees Celsius warming is not only about minimizing the impacts of adaptation, but it's also a question of avoiding crossing tipping points. And let me just share with you 2 of these risks of tipping elements here, the jet stream and the thermohaline circulation. Now the Gulf Stream, which is part of the ocean circulation of heat, is slowing down. This is a nervousness from science, not indicating yet that we're at a tipping point, but it's recent findings showing that the big conveyor belt of heat that is flowing up warm water from the equator and releasing back cold water, deeper water back to the equator, is slowing down. That can affect the living opportunities in this part of the world here in the Nordics. Now, the second one is the jet stream, which we're starting to see indications that is behaving so weird because this high wind system in the upper atmosphere that depends on the gradient between a cold Arctic and a warm equator, when the Arctic is warming so fast, twice as fast as the rest of the planet, that gradient is weakened. The jet stream becomes weirder and locks in high and low pressure systems that could explain the heat wave we saw in Europe this year. So you see sudden, surprising, amplifying effects at 1 degree Celsius warming related to tipping points in the Earth system. So it's not surprising when the IPCC released the 1.5 degrees Celsius report. For the first time, science is very clear saying that actually 1.5 degrees Celsius is not only about impacts that can hit social, economically today, it is has a very strong scientific support in terms of being able to stay within a safe operating space. The pathway for the 1.5 degrees Celsius is shown here in green, which means bending the global curve of emissions no later than 2020, and actually reducing the emissions at a pace that means cutting emissions by half by 2030, cutting by half in 12 years, and reaching a world fossil fuel-free economy by 2050. That is the scientific knowledge today, and it requires what? Well, it requires that we actually do the same for nitrous oxide, methane, and keep all the natural ecosystems intact. So let me just close with some hints that it's actually possible to succeed. Together with Christiana Figueres, I presented this following exponential carbon action plan at the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco a few months back, showing that there's evidence that we actually can cut emissions by half by 2030 by integrating systems with land, water, biodiversity, and climate. Now what you see here to the left is the indication that carbon is increasingly being decoupled from economic growth, which is so positive. Over 40 countries have decoupled economic growth from greenhouse gas emissions, Sweden being one of them. To the right, you see the countries that have actually adopted a price on carbon, now being up to 50 countries. We see an exponential rise of action towards sustainability. But the most interesting is this. Together with Project Drawdown and Paul Hawken and team, we tried to really do wedge analysis of existing technologies to see sector by sector, can we cut emissions by half by 2030? And we indicate that yes, it is possible, from energy supply to industry, buildings, but as you see here, also in food consumption and agriculture, which is all about sustainable management of land and water. So this takes me as a closing kind of summing up to the Sustainable Development Goals. This major accomplishment of the world community of adopting an aspirational universal plan for humanity in these 17 goals. Science shows that we're not allowed to do what we tend to do today, which is essentially to operate them as a Swedish smorgasbord. We kind of pick our goodies and walk with one goal at a time. Science shows we need to operate these as a wedding cake. There are 4 non-negotiable Sustainable Development Goals which form the basis for a stable planet. It's water, it's climate, it's biodiversity, it's oceans. And beyond these, we can have aspirational social and economic goals that can be successful within these. We have science gathering to look at these transformation pathways to reach Sustainable Development Goals in 2030 within planetary boundaries by 2050. It's a transformational journey of a new restructuring of the economy, of technologies, of equity. In January, we'll see the Eat Lancet Commission for the first time define scientific targets for healthy diets from sustainable food systems, providing science-based targets for society. We see increasingly science-based targets being brought forward to business as well. We mean business, and the World Business Council, working very hard to get science-based targets for the Earth system, the 2 degrees Celsius equivalent for water, for land, for biodiversity, to be able to really transform in this direction. So my message at a meeting where water matters is, let's take a systems perspective. Let's take the whole Earth as our challenge today and say that yes, we can now transform and meet the Sustainable Development Goals within a safe operating space of a stable and resilient planet. And water matters more than anything on that journey. Thank you very much.
I spent my childhood in India, and water on the tap was always a miraculous thing for me. And we used to always look forward to it. And it used to be only for a few hours every day. So all our lives revolved around it. And the first time I saw that you could get water on the tap, it was amazing.
I'm interested in water, and both from a general perspective, but also from a business perspective. I think water is going to be a scarce source, and we need to further improve the quality of the water we're drinking, actually. That's what I think.
Well, I was born in Venezuela, and right now it's facing a lot of challenges, especially healthy-wise, not being able to have access to clean water, to trying able to find new ways to make it more accessible and healthy so people can, I mean, everyone should have access to clean water. It's even here in Sweden, we've been having problems, even though we think we have a lot of water. So to me, it's more about learning what are we doing about the subject and what can we do about the subject.
So I'm here to learn more about how I can reduce water consumption on a personal level, and how can I support others in doing that in a way that we value water, but we also don't create some inequality borders between people.
I've been sailing all my life, and both sailing racing and sailing for fun with the family. So the water is very important for me.
Thank you so much for your views, and how important to be reminded that water is fun as well. Having heard Johan's analysis of the situation, we thought it might be good to jump straight into the question of what we can do about it. So we thought we'd focus on activism for a while. And to start us off, I'd like to ask Maud Barlow to give us a talk, please.
The United Nations calls water scarcity the scourge of the earth. Every day, 2 billion people are forced to drink contaminated water, and every 2 minutes, a child under the age of 5 dies from waterborne disease. If we do not change our ways, by 2030, 5 billion people could be living with serious water shortages. In 2010, the people of the world took an evolutionary step forward when the United Nations recognized water and sanitation as fundamental human rights. That day, we collectively declared that it is not acceptable for a person to die or watch their child die of waterborne disease because they could not buy clean water. Most importantly, we recognize that access to water and sanitation is an issue of justice, not charity. Now nearly 4 dozen countries have amended their constitution or brought in new laws to guarantee the human right to water. And a number of the most marginalized communities on earth have used the courts and the UN resolutions to force their governments to recognize these fundamental human rights. As we move forward to address the twin water crises, one ecological and one human, we must do so based on a set of shared values. While the ecological crisis impacts all of us, it impacts the poor differently. And not just in the global south, water cutoffs to the poor are now happening increasingly in wealthy countries of the north. To truly guarantee the human right to water, we must protect it as a public trust and a commons, not a commodity to be put on the open market for sale like oil and gas. And we must challenge the current power structures and institutions that support unequal access to the planet's dwindling water supplies. Our goal must be clean, affordable, accessible, public water for all, for everywhere, for all time. But it will be impossible to realize this right to water if we continue to pollute, plunder, divert, over-extract, and mismanage the planet's limited water sources. Make no mistake, while climate change negatively impacts water, our collective abuse of water is also a part of the story of climate change, climate chaos. If we were to stop every greenhouse gas emission in the world today, we would still have a water crisis. The good news is that restoring watersheds and protecting water is one of the ways that we can mitigate against climate chaos. Therefore, we must stop seeing water as a resource for our pleasure and profit and understand it to be the key element in the living ecosystem that gives us all life. Water has rights outside of its usefulness to humans. Water belongs to the earth, it belongs to other species, it belongs to other living beings, it belongs to the ecosystem, and it requires new laws of governance, new, more natural-based, nature-based laws, earth-centered laws for governance. Finally, we will never realize the human right to water as long as water is a source of conflict, violence, and even war. Rather, and here is the miracle, water has been and can be again a source of peace if we understand its lessons. Just as groundwater and springs and rivers and lakes are all interconnected and all interdependent, so too are we humans. If we truly listen, water could become nature's gift to teach us how to live more lightly on Mother Earth and in peace and harmony with one another. Thank you.
We gave you 4 minutes, and you used 4 minutes and 2 seconds. How did you manage that? It's quite remarkable. So, actually, Maud, I'm going to move you one seat over, please, because we're now going to move into a panel entitled Don't Talk, Act. In fact, it's Talk and Act, I guess, because it's a panel. But Maud, you very kindly agreed to moderate it, and I'd like to welcome on stage Jan Eliasson, Beatrice Finn, and Gary White to join you.
Well, welcome to you all. This is a group of people who are activists who know that just knowing that a problem exists isn't enough. You have to get up and do something about it every day. And I've asked each of them to please start with a 2-minute statement, 2 to 3 minute statement on what activism means to them, what's most important, what they about the work that they've done, what they feel they accomplished through their work. So perhaps I can start with Jan, please.
I just grabbed a glass of water.
I just got a beautiful glass of water.
You know, this is a luxury and a dream for about 860 million people who have urgent need. There are the figures of deficiencies and problems with this. 2.5 billion people don't have sanitation. And I wanted to revise, first of all, the title of our discussion, because it says, don't talk, but act. I think we need to both talk and act. Because we need these words today that are so important. On water, for instance, I I find 5 verbs very important. Share water, save water, circulate water, clean water, and honor water. Honor water, by that I mean water is sacred. Water is life, as you said, Maud. And also, in the UN, when I was President of the General Assembly, we had a formula called, there is no peace without development, and there is no development without peace, and there is no peace and development without human rights. So when I say water is peace, water is development, sustainable development, and water is a human right, as you just pointed out, and where you also have done work. So I would say that would be the most important primary message in our discussion, but I would also add that my special, slightly masochistic activity in my life has been conflict resolution. And I see a great danger ahead of us that water more and more will become, as a scarce resource, a source of conflict instead of a source of cooperation. It's a great challenge that we turn the water scarcity into a possibility, into a project of cooperation rather than invitation to conflict. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Beatrice, please.
Yeah, it's really, really great to be here and to have an opportunity to really celebrate the values of science and knowledge. But of course, as we all know today, providing facts is just not always enough to change people's minds. For science and knowledge to actually shape and change the world, we really need to act on it. And that's really why, I can, and myself personally, we're all about the doers, the people that get things done. Because activism it's about action. And I think that often we feel that just talking, especially talking online perhaps today, is action. But activism is really about showing up, about demanding good policies, and perhaps more importantly, getting in the way of bad policies. But we won't really just tweet our way into victory. And the key is really to make sure that the talking that we do, which is really necessary, I agree, but that it leads to action. And that we can do that by creating movements that is backed up by science and research, and that demands concrete change, specific things that needs to change. And I also think that it's really important to remember that activists don't operate in silos. We each have perhaps our different issues that we work on, but I think that that's sometimes wrong to impose on the public. People don't see the world as a series of separate issues. For them, they see human problems that are all interconnected. And I think that ICANN has been successful in activism because we have linked those issues. I actually just came back from New Zealand, where I met these fantastic young activists from Fiji, Marsh Islands, Cook Islands, that really, for them, working on nuclear weapons and the impact of nuclear testing in the Pacific is so inherently linked to their way of life, their environment, their water, colonialism, like their rights, and also climate change. So I think that when we linked these issues together, we can really motivate people for change. So we are stronger when we work together, when science and activists work together to change.
Wonderful, thank you, Gary.
Well, thank you, Maud. It's great to be here with you, someone who's contributed so much to the water and sanitation sector over the years. It's a real honor to be with you in this audience. To me, activism means tearing down the barriers between people living in poverty and safe water and sanitation. And at first blush with water.org, we saw those barriers as more engineering. But as we moved along, we brought these insights to the challenge. And those insights led us to believe that it's really financial barriers that we need through our activism to tear down between people and access to safe water. And that comes from insights, right? So what I discovered after doing this work for many years was that poor people were actually already paying huge amounts of money for water and sanitation services. I met people in India who were paying loan sharks 125% interest just so they could build a toilet. People who were spending 25% of their income on water from water vendors when they could go and get water connections and pay 1/15 of that amount. So it was those insights that led us to be activists in the way that we drive microfinance and access to small loans for people living in poverty. And that's what we call water credit. And water credit allows people to get that loan that they need, sometimes as little as $200 or $300, so that they can activate on their own behalf and get the water and sanitation solutions that's best for them and their families. And so what we've done with this initiative is allow more than 16 million people to become their own activists and get access to water and sanitation through these small loans. And that's important for another reason as well. Not only is it a source of empowerment from the bottom up, but it also reflects the reality that there's never going to be enough charity, enough philanthropy, enough development assistance in the world to solve this crisis. It would take about 3 times what we're investing each year right now in order even to begin to do that. And so for me, we have to continue to have this activism driven from the human right to water from the top down. We have to have more investment in the infrastructure, but we also need to see those living in poverty not necessarily as the problem to be solved, but maybe as a market to be served.
So I want to ask all of you about this question, because all of you have talked about the grassroots, and certainly in the movement that we built to get the United Nations to recognize the human right to water, it really did come from grassroots movements around the world. We spent a lot of time, I personally spent a lot of time going into communities all over the world. Remember a very clear memory in one very poor area in Bolivia. This person gave me a glass of their precious water, and I said, no, I can get water elsewhere. No, this was, she wanted to share, she wanted to say thank you. And what I learned is how much knowledge I still needed to learn, and I want to hear from each of you about because you've worked in water aid and in your work on the nuclear, and then of course with you with water equity. If you could just talk about this notion of what we have to learn and how important it is to hear from people who are living in water stress or no water at all. Gary, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, so you mentioned water equity, and water equity is a spinoff from water.org that is an investment fund manager. So basically water equity raises capital on the global capital markets, particularly through social impact investing, and then we invest that in microfinance institutions, other water and sanitation enterprises that serve the base of the pyramid. And what we discovered is that by unleashing the capital markets, we can actually help people get access to water and sanitation at affordable rates. They can repay those loans. And so what we offer investors for our first fund, for instance, for about every $1 million that we had in assets under management over the 7-year life of that fund, we could reach about 100,000 people with safe water. And that's money that goes back to the investors eventually, plus a financial return. So with the concentration of wealth in the world today, surely there's a lot that will be invested in philanthropy, but we believe that there's billions more that would come into this if we could provide that financial return and tap into social impact investing. And what we've done is build that in space. So we've now unleashed more than $1 billion in these micro loans around the world. They've been repaid at a 99% rate. 94% of the borrowers are women. So we have this underlying asset that attracts investors into the scene. So now we have about $60 million of assets under management, and hopefully next year that'll move up to north of $200 million.
Wonderful, thank you. And Beatrice, same question to you, but also, what did it mean for your organization to win the Nobel? Like, what doors did that open for you?
Yeah, I think that first I think it's important to remember that politicians aren't going to solve things for us. And they're definitely not going to solve problems unless they really have to. And we have to make them have to. And one of the things that we learned in our work was really, to put the focus on the people and lift up individual stories. And I think that we see that on the water issue, on climate change, on nuclear weapons. When you look at the impact of this problem and what it means for human beings, it's so much easier to mobilize people for change. When you think about structures and it's just, very stale and structural, you can't really feel it. It's easy to just not care. So if you look at people, and I think that one of the things that was really amazing for winning the Nobel Peace Prize with ICANN was also that it wasn't given to one person. It was a big movement. And today, with our kind of celebrity-obsessed culture, we like to think that there's going to be a president or one person or a celebrity that's going to save us all. And you forget that they don't do that unless all of, there's grassroots movements. They might sign the treaty, they might sign these agreements and take that final step, but they did that because the activism. So we take it as an encouragement for civil society and for campaigners and activists to really keep working. It's so ungrateful sometimes, this work. And you're banging your head against the wall and you feel really frustrated. But that is what is actually delivering results. Not everyone gets a Nobel Peace Prize as a thank you. But maybe, just don't say never, because we also said never, but so really I think that needs to be celebrated, the small steps that individuals take together in communities to address problems.
I really thank you for that. I have a 98-year-old friend who said to me, do you have a quiet mind? And I said, not particularly, I'm trying to find it, right? And she said, you'll get a quiet mind when you trust that there's a lot of people who care the way you do, and they're doing their own thing, and you don't have to carry all this. And I think that's a lesson to all of us. Jan, same question to you on the grassroots and the people we serve in this work, but also a little more on your statement on conflict resolution, because I know that's a very big part of your current work.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think Beatrice is right. Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. And I think one thing we have to fight is this sense of hopelessness, that we can't handle it. You turn off the television, stop the world, I want to get off. So we got to higher hope in spite of a pretty dark picture. I'm usually an optimist, but I say these days I'm a worried optimist. Even to the limit sometimes of being a pessimist who hasn't quite yet given up. But we have to mobilize hope. And I want to point at something which is absolutely necessary to now follow, and that is the Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 of them. I have the chart in my pocket together with the UN Charter, I don't have to prove it. And goal number 6 is of course water, but they form a whole. If we do what is in these 17 goals, we have a roadmap for a sustainable future. We have a repair tool for the world. And we have, as Johan Rockström and I concluded in discussion, we have a survival kit for humanity. So when people say, what can we do? Learn about these 17 goals and see how they are interconnected. If you do water right, as we all know, we reduce child mortality. We improve maternal health. We improve education. Equality between girls and boys in schools in Africa, and extreme poverty. So this is a great tool, and I think we need to mobilize not only governments and UN, where I was active, but also public opinion, media, civil society, business, and the science community. Lars Heckenstein, the science community can do a tremendous role in fulfilling these goals. And I'm very glad Crown Princess Victoria is here today. She is an advocate for the Sustainable Development Goals, and she is also an honorary patron of WaterAid, an organization which I chaired once upon a day. And this shows that this should involve all of us, and we should all set examples to act and make a difference and mobilize not least young people today. Work with them. We shouldn't only work for young people, we should work with young people. The conflict thing I covered in my early intervention. I know we have only a short time, but my point is simply there is a tremendous opportunity in finding ways of cooperation, sharing water, rather than using it for war. When I was in Darfur, I saw the militia throwing dogs, dead dogs in the wells to chase the population away. What use do they have of that water, that well afterwards? So we have to do it in the life and self-interest. Not only because it's the right thing, to develop models of cooperation. Otherwise we will have a horrible future where water scarcity will be a reason of conflict locally, nationally and internationally.
Well, with just a couple of minutes left to go, thank you so much for that. I'd like each of you just to say something about hope, because I think the point that's been made by all of us, and certainly in the first keynote, is that we are in a climate crisis now, and we all know this. Some people don't know this. You can think of some people whose names come to mind, don't seem to know it. Make decisions about our lives, right? Yes. hope is very important. It's a moral imperative, especially when you're working with young people, because you can't take just this negative message, as you know this, and we can change. And in my lifetime, I mean, the year my mother was born in Canada, the Elections Act said no woman, idiot, lunatic, or child shall vote. I mean, you know, things can change. So a word on hope from each of you, please.
Well, for me, the hope is there, right? More than 2 billion people have brought their way out of extreme poverty in the last 2 decades, right? 2 billion people have lifted themselves up. I think that's reason for hope. For water, the reason for hope for them is that they're already paying for water. And if we can just redirect some of these huge costs that they're paying, they're going to have hope to get water. And I'm hopeful because there's never been a greater concentration of wealth in this world than there is right now. And I believe there's never been a greater concentration on the part of those to provide that type of assistance and that type of catalytic philanthropy that we need to get this done. So I'm hopeful for all 3 of those reasons.
Thank you, Gary. Beatrice.
Yeah, I'm an eternal optimist. I am extremely hopeful because I meet people all the time that say that they want to do things and they believe in this. On climate change, it feels really depressing when you see the headlines, but there are more people today that care about this issue, believe in the science, believe in the research, and know that we have to do something than ever. And that's a huge benefit. And then I also think that I'm hopeful because I see the impact the campaigning can have. I mean, we just a small group of NGOs, not very powerful, and we managed to, get negotiations on a treaty banning nuclear weapons, despite the most powerful people. And I think that we're doing ourselves a disfavor of just obsessing about 1 or 2 leaders and just looking at them and letting them dominate all of our minds when there's so much good that goes on. So I think that we need to also look at the success and feel confident about that.
Lovely. Last word to you, Jan.
Hope, I see 4 reasons for hope. First of all, women. I think it's a historic breakthrough for women in the world. It's never happened before. It's going to happen in the next 2 decades, I think. All over the world, I see it. When I went to work with the UN, it's coming as like a big, wonderful wave. And we men should be behind it fully. Great big piece of good news. Secondly, young people. Fantastic potential. I go to my grandchildren's schools now. I get younger every visit. Fantastic. Thirdly, knowledge, science, technology. The search for knowledge, where we can do so much, not least on the issues that we're discussing here, water and survival, and the climate disruption that happens. And I was about to say the last joke, but I say the fourth hope is, to me, international cooperation, which is in danger now. There are those who think they can look inward and find security only for themselves and not see that they are part of a larger entity. And that trend we have to really fight and stand up for. And as a particular part of international cooperation that I have special interest in is international diplomacy. The word, to use the word, to act early, not go into conflict, come in at the late stages, but listen to the vibrations and act early. So those are my 4 reasons for hope, and I think it's enough to keep me going.
Well, thank you so much. You give us hope, so thank you not only for participating in your knowledge, but your wonderful work, all of you. Thank you very much for a wonderful evening.